fun.
Welcome to our 4th broadcast of the season and our last broadcast as part of New York Fashion Week. I'm here with photographer and SHOWstudio director Nick Knight.
Hello.
Hello. Our wonderful stalwart panellist and fabulous writer Camilla Morton. You always look shy when I say that. And the brilliant Mandi Lennard of Mandi's Basement. Welcome to our wonderful panellists. How are you enjoying New York Fashion Week so far?
Yeah, it's great. It's good to see the action as it happens and all the social media.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that's actually been really interesting with this, with doing these panels, is we've realised how much people communicate fashion through things like Instagram and Twitter. Because just looking at the backstage stuff that we're pulling in, it shows even before the show starts, you kind of know what's
you
what's
already know the
on.
mood, the atmosphere. You really feel like you're there, even though we're in London, they're in New York. Before it felt very far away and you felt very disconnected if you weren't there, but now you can see people queuing up to get in, you can see what they're eating, you can see the hair and makeup happening, you get all the clues, and it's really exciting to feel involved in this way.
Nick, you've really embraced sort of new forms of communication about fashion, so like things like Tumblr, even you love your Instagram as well.
Absolutely.
And what do you think of these kind of new forms that are starting to be a way of communicating?
Well, I do think the whole thing's fascinating, all this sort of phenomenon of being able to get the imagery straight away, and you know, almost before the models hit the catwalk, you've seen her already. And I was thinking this morning that we're about, I won't give anything too much away by saying we're going to review Marc Jacobs' show from last night. I was thinking, it already feels like a long time ago.
Yeah.
You know, and there's this sort of immediateness on all of fashion now, which is really, it's fundamentally changing the whole fashion scene. So of course, if people are seeing the clothes now, they want to buy them now. They don't want to wait for 3 months to see them in a magazine and then buy them in 6 months later. You know, the whole cycle's been sped up to an infinite degree. And I know we're starting to find people like Burberry, and I know Gareth Pugh in the past, to sell actually from the collections. Gareth sold something on SHOWstudio during one of the collections, and Burberry of course sell from the catwalk. So you know that's starting to happen. It's a real revolution, and I think it's very exciting to live through this revolution. I'm not sure if the fashion world's adjusted to it yet, because it's been such an old institution in the way they've been set ways of doing things. But I'm not sure if the fashion world's quite A, woken up to it, B, is at ease with it. You know, because some designers try to clamp down, so there's no iPhones, no Instagram, nothing at all. And others embrace it and let it happen.
Yeah, I think the ones that are embracing it, like Burberry, are benefiting from it. I mean, I think Tom Ford played an interesting game. I mean, what do you think from a PR point of view?
I think that
the way he refused to let them in, or...
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's interesting about that is that you almost like respect him for having the confidence to say, no, I don't want them to come in. So I thought that was quite interesting. And why shouldn't he? I think there's no rules anymore. And I think that with Alexander Wang, he released a whole accessories collection very, very early after one of his shows. But what I love about all this, seeing it unfold, we can see the queues outside the show waiting to get in, everyone being seated, is the fact that it gives random bloggers a voice, because when you're not at the show and you're trying to look for information or first clues, you know, it's not the obvious style.com or vogue.com or SHOWstudio that you might find it. Actually, this random blogger has got a voice, and sometimes people like us would cling on to that first image, and that image can become one of the most shown images of the day, but actually it could be from anyone.
I noticed because I covered the couture for SHOWstudio and for W Magazine, the last set of couture, and I hadn't actually been to the shows for ages. I don't normally go to the shows. And I was really interested, and it's fascinating, this sort of different layers and different levels. You know, when you arrive in the cab to go to the show, you're met by a crowd of bloggers now. And it's a real scene. I mean, there are obviously stars within it, and then you sort of go through that, and you're sort of let through the gates because you've got a ticket, and it's a different sort of press that get you there. And then and then there's all the sort of people who are allowed into the thing itself. There's all these different levels, and they're all feeding out to different different audiences. I think it is fascinating, but it's I don't know how much it felt like a circus.
It is weird in New York though, because the whole blogger thing is very different to anywhere else. I don't know whether you felt that, but the bloggers there don't seem to have the same etiquette. They literally put no, they're not rude, but they feel that they have a right to everybody, and they just put the camera in anybody's face. They don't say, I think anywhere else that you go, they know the appropriate moment when to kind of stuff a camera in your face. But in New York it's very blatant, and you almost feel that anyone can be a blogger. It's like a lot of them are. Anyone has just rocked up as a blogger.
But do you think that's beneficial? It's like democratising fashion in a way.
Yeah, I think it's great to see different perspectives. I mean, there's room for everybody.
Do you find that it's changed the way that you find people approach your work with something like your Instagrams? It's in a similar way to a designer using social media to sort of give little snippets away about their collection. Like a lot of the New York designers actually have, sort of posting
little
inspiration
previews
images.
or-
Exactly.
This is what we see first coming up on the streams. The images from the designers.
Yeah.
That's what comes out first. Sorry, Lou, you about to ask me something?
No, I was just going to say, do you think that it's kind of a new way of showing off your work and showing off your skills?
Do you mean Instagram in particular?
Yeah, Instagram or something like Twitter in the way the designers use it. For you, obviously, it's your Instagram.
Well, I mean, for me with Instagram, it's taken me back to my very first days of doing photography, where there was no post-production, there was no darkroom technique you could add to it. You just took a picture and out it came. Well, not out it came, you sent the film, out it came back. So it's taking back sort of a basic photography is what I'm trying to say, which is quite refreshing. I'm not trying to say that I don't want to do the other sort of photography, I just think there's something nice to be able to pick up my phone, take a picture, and then it's published to 500,000 people.
I mean, it's become an art form, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Some people have become these incredible artists on Instagram. To people that are known for other
well,
jobs.
look at Sam McKnight. He's beautiful on his
Absolutely.
Instagram.
Sam
I'm
McKnight,
quite jealous of his
Yeah.
gardening and his cooking.
Yeah.
But I also think Twitter's quite powerful for words. I mean, I know you only get 140 characters to play with, but usually when you write a review, you would get a little bit of time to and think about what you were going to say. And now it's sort of like an instant gut reaction, and you just say it right away, and there it is. You can't take it back. And I think that it's quite powerful because you can't hide from it. You have to just have the courage of your conviction and go for it the whole time. And sometimes people, I think it encourages people to have their own opinion and put it out there more. I mean, yes, there are a lot more opinions to sift through, but it's interesting.
The good ones
Yeah.
come to the top.
Yeah,
People
the ones
saying
are
something
recognised for their voice.
Exactly.
But actually, when it comes to the shows, I want to know what someone like you, Nick, is picking up on. I want to know what Katie Grant is picking up on. I want to hear Fran Burns from Vogue's tweets. You've got your favourites, and you want to know what their vision is.
Yeah.
It's not the same as me watching it. And when it was the menswear shows recently, I was sick and I couldn't go. It was the first London Fashion Week one. And actually, I just watched it all unfold from Twitter, and I didn't feel shortchanged. I felt I got what I needed from Twitter. It was amazing.
I think you saw that with the Marc Jacobs show, how it just kind of exploded on Twitter, and in particular it's a standout from New York Fashion Week, which I do want to kind of talk about the favourites, but Alex Wang, those kind of fluorescent dresses, the glow-in-the-dark dresses, that was trending on Twitter, and you can see the enthusiasm for something in such a kind of simple and immediate way.
It's an international party, anyone can join in.
Yeah.
That's what's great about it. And what's really nice is when the people of influence retweet that random unknown person that's hit a note, and it's immediate. They don't think, oh, who's this person I'm retweeting? If they feel it, they retweet it.
Yeah.
But this is all new media. Without being in any way sort of biasing us or whatever, where do we think it's going to go for magazines? Because we're seeing everything now, we're digesting it, we're ordering it online, we're absolutely getting to know it. So what's the purpose of the fashion magazine anymore? And I'm not loading the question saying it hasn't got a purpose. I'm just interested to know what
I
you're saying.
think the magazine is there to show the inspiration, to inspire you, and it's there to paint a picture and to group the designers and to do something inspiring and put it in a different way, maybe style it in an unexpected way, or this is Rodarte and how they're going to do their vision of it. Marc Jacobs did his vision, and I think you do still rely on the magazines to mix it in an unexpected way and piece it together so that you rethink it, but also so it refreshes you, so that the September Bible issue comes out and you pick it up and you think, oh yes, I do remember, I was obsessed with that, and I can now go, and it makes you fall in love with the collection again, or it gives you a taste of it. I mean, do you remember when there were the Collectiones, the big magazines, where you'd go to R.D. Frank's and you'd flick through the pages and see the designers and earmark the things that you thought were influential?
I used to go into magazines in New York, and the fashion editors would be looking through those magazines like they do with Style.com now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like there's a point where you think, when does that become redundant?
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I remember a very early Hussein show, and I got on a non-stop train to Brighton rather than go to the Hussein Shalayan show.
What, on purpose?
No, I just was distracted by fashion and life, and I sailed off to Brighton.
Can you imagine what it was like if you had Twitter then?
No, but if I had even a mobile phone, I had to get off at some random place I had to go to a cafe in Brighton and phone up somebody that was thankfully in the office, but she was too late, she couldn't get into the show. And it was a nightmare because in those days, if you missed the show, that was it, it was the end of the world. You had to sort of massively fudge. I had to come back from Brighton, go to the end of the show. They were all packing up and I had to go through the rails as they were sending it away to go back and sort of gently fudge that one for the whole season. But now if you miss a show, you actually get a better view from the internet. And I think that for the magazines, they have to find a way to, you know, maybe engage you in a different way, maybe tell the story or look at the inspiration, or sort of involve the designers and get them creatively involved in a way that you would find it unexpected, like Sam with his garden or his Instagram, and sort of trick you into not trick you, but sort of like tease a new way of seeing it.
Well, there's an element of nostalgia, I think, to magazines, and I think it runs directly against what we were saying all things like Twitter and Tumblr do. Is it keeps that element of exclusivity, which in a way can be something that's nice, you know, that kind of, that intense beauty, that unattainable sort of wonderful beauty.
I don't know whether I see the nostalgia. I mean, I think that we're all feeding off all these snippets and immediate pieces of information. I mean, I can't say that when I go on the internet throughout the day that I'm relaxing and savouring these moments. I'm not. I'm hungry and I want more, and it's exhausting. Yeah. But actually, when I sit down and read a magazine, that's almost like the couture element. Like, I can savour in it. And I actually want to see who did the makeup in the shoot, and I'm prepared to turn it on its side and look at the small print and the credits.
Yeah. But do you think that will last, or do you think for sort of younger generations it is just kind of that hunger that's going to sort of...
It's a platform to kind of give imagery. I mean, your imagery, Nick, you know, there's a very big difference to seeing it online and seeing it in print. I mean, obviously when it's moving imagery, it's exquisite and it's beautiful, and you can't possibly capture that in a magazine. But, you know, I think it would be terrible if someone like you didn't have the platform of a kind of biannual or monthly magazine.
Sorry.
But go on, I was just sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, similarly, you can't see you see the clothes on the Twitter. You have to interact and try it on and feel it physically. I think, you know, everything has a different platform.
I mean, it's not going to replace every part of the fashion world, as we know. But the thing I always say, partly through my own surprise, is that I have 3 children, all now in their late, well, actually Cam's 15, but all getting towards the end of their teens, who've never read magazines. And they're not interested. And they might pick up Grazia occasionally. This is, you know, I live in a house where
they're very app savvy, aren't they?
Yeah, very. So, and it's very hard to see how that generation, when they grow up, and the generations that follow them, will then want to go back to magazines. And in my opinion, if the magazines are going to survive, then they've got to do what they're really, really good at, which is great imagery. You know,
don't you think though that all these platforms, which is something that you've opened the gateway of, is that actually the magazine is still vital, but it won't survive without joining the dots of Twitter, websites, you know, almost like the magazine has to exist, but it won't exist if you don't join it to an accompanying website, a kind of daily news thing, opinions online. But that's homage to the actual magazine that keeps the couture element.
I think they will only survive if they really get behind fashion photography in a big way, and they haven't done. I mean, in the last 20 years or so that I've been working, there hasn't been a great age of fashion photography. And the alternative press like ID Magazine, Dating Confused, now W, you know, there's certain magazines that have. A lot of the mainstream fashion magazines have slightly not got behind it as an art form.
Something new that's coming through there that I think is really exciting is this snobbery about doing shoots for online that aren't placed in a magazine. That's kind of dissipating a little bit. So actually all those new photographers that haven't had the chance to go through being a new photographer who's doing something for ID or doing advertorials for the big magazines where they're tested out, they can actually do a shoot online and not feel, oh, I'm selling myself short by doing this. The snobbery is kind of going away a little bit, and I think that is a bit of a future to release or present a new talent.
I want to pick up on an idea that kind of got mentioned about magazines kind of always being a bit delayed compared to the immediacy of the internet. You mentioned sort of how you're going through the internet and you have that hunger, you want more and more. Because that's something, a lot of the commentary around the Marc Jacobs show has focused on whether it was kind of in some way a sign of the times, a political comment on the possibility of a Republican regime, and it's kind of nostalgia to the 60s and trying to make this point. But it ties into a broader issue, whether or not that was the case, about fashion being kind of, when it's presented, its relevance compared to when it actually goes for sale, and whether it's something Nick mentioned earlier about when things are sold. And it's, in a way, a collection, for Marc Jacobs or Rodarte, who we're going to talk about later, they often pick up on these themes and these issues, and they often make a statement, and then that statement is kind of diffused and forgotten until that collection reappears in store. And is that...
I think what a lot of people forget is that when these images are released online, it's not just the fashion editors and people that love fashion that go on, But I think Sarah Moore once mentioned to me that it was shocking to know the demographic and the volume of people that click on these websites as soon as the shows are over. I mean, you've even got like the people in the factories in Hong Kong, the kind of seamstresses, everyone looking for these ideas, the counterfeiters, everybody. I mean, straight away, you don't think the high street aren't getting ready for this big resurgence of stripes. I mean, we're all enjoying spots at the moment with the Aya Kasama and everything, and it's all spot fantastic everywhere. But this stripe message is so loud and clear, and what's hilarious about this show and actually shocking is that first image. I mean, that first image can be interpreted in so many ways. When that model came out on the runway, I mean, you know, is it an Everton mint? Is it a barcode for a clothing? Is it the cover of Blondie's album? It's just 1,000 messages there, and in the middle of it all, an awesome shoe, which is like a pointed ballerina flight with a T-bar.
So should we move on to talk about?
Yeah, I was going to say, we kind of, I naturally tried to bring that into Marc Jacobs.
Lou, is it worth doing some mention of what today is?
Yeah, I think what we want to do today is kind of have a general discussion about New York and not have a roundup in the sense of going through every designer, but definitely kind of pick out our favourites and talk about how we think New York's been, because it is our last broadcast. So we'll start with Marc, because I think it was a good one, given it was last night. What you mentioned, you kind of how great that first exit was, but what did everyone think of Marc? Because what did you think?
Oh, you put me on the spot? I thought it was brilliant, actually. I was very pleased to see it. Often I look at Marc's collections and I'm not sure stylistically where he's coming from. But I look at collections and fashion in general from the eye of a photographer or a filmmaker. I've got to make these things look in an image. And if you've got something as graphic as Marc presented last night, for me it's just a phew. When that comes out of the makeup room, out of the styling room to be in front of my camera, I know it's going to work. So image-wise, and you said you're just a simple t-shirt, it's got a fantastic sort of immediate delivery. So for me, it's a great collection because I know I'll be asked to photograph it, and I know it'll photograph itself. You know, some collections don't, some clothes don't. Some clothes you have to search more and you have to find the meaning. And there are different levels of it, but that's a very, very easy collection to photograph. So I'm obviously not going to buy the clothes myself to wear, but from a photographer's point of view, I think it's great. And I think, you know, it's actually it seems to be putting on a lot of interesting things, a lot of different interesting references.
That's another trend that's coming through as well, the long coat over the knee-length skirt. You know, as women dressing in fashion, you know, there's always this paranoia, oh, is my coat long enough to go over my outfit? And I love the way that there's this trend coming through where actually having the coat not quite long enough, that is definitely something that's coming through in a lot of the shows. What did you think of it?
I think Marc is he's such an important axis. There are sort of like certain turning points throughout the fashion season, and Marc is one of the benchmarks where you get to Marc's show on a Monday night and everything that you've seen before starts to make sense, and everything else afterwards has now got a box to go into. And Susie Menkes mentioned that she thought that the dress had gone this season, and this season was the season of separates. And Marc has been doing the separates, and then his bold stripes and his very graphic clean lines and the sheers and the transparencies and the newness around the collar line and the cuff lengths. You know, he always, Ingrid Sishi said on the live stream as she went in, you never know what to expect. The thing with Marc is it's always unexpected, and it's always, you know, and I think a bit how you were saying about fashion earlier, Marc is the ultimate barometer of the now. He always captures the moment of the mood that he's in, and he doesn't reference the past or the future, he references the mood that he's feeling right now. And I think that from that confidence, it's a very good gauge of where the season's going to go from here.
He doesn't follow the trends, does he?
No. Well, it's really, I wanted to pick up on something you said because I found it really interesting. You said it was from a visual perspective. If you were shooting something, you said it's the simplicity and the obvious of how sort of that will shoot well and it looks great. But that's kind of something all of you mentioned, the reason you liked it is that the simplicity and just kind of and it's not a simple collection.
It's a confidence.
It's not simple, it's confident. Look at that red dress with the ruffle collar there. You know, you could take a
candy stripe.
You know, it's a candy stripe around a Lacoste top, and suddenly it's sort of demicatured itself.
And he knows his customer. That little cute ruffle thing is the Marc Jacobs customer more than any other part of the show. But then I think that the other elements of the show, all the stripes and monochrome, they are so commercial. That's almost like attracting a new customer.
I mean, you must find from your experience with shows, it's the first 5 looks that make or break a show. They set the mood.
It's like you said about the t-shirt.
You know, it's like making a first impression at a party. When you walk into the room, when you open a show, you have to start with a real bang of intent. And I think last night when he started with that,
even the makeup trends. I mean, that's not just smudged eyeshadow. Actually, the mascara is intentionally smudged. And actually, this is the first Marc Jacobs show that Katie Grant has styled.
Is it?
Yeah.
I really shouldn't have done. Who used to do them then?
Camille Waddington's done them, and I think there's
I think
also
Camille did Marc by Marc. Wasn't it Alex White? Or what? No, that was ages ago.
Okay, so
someone
it's Katie's
tell
first.
Tell us over our earpiece, that would be
yes.
And also, after the big hippy-dippy hats of last season, you know, Stephen Jones has had a season off.
Yeah. I did.
I mean, you had to have. I mean, true to form with Marc, you know, if he's done hats in a big way last time, he wasn't going to do it this time.
No.
But the minimalism of this show is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because even the leopard print dress, I mean, it's as far removed from tacky leopard as you'll ever get.
Yeah.
It's such a lean look, and he just nailed it with that dress as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I went back looking at Marc's work yesterday, knowing that I would have to come and talk about it, I went back and looked at all the collections, and it's, you know, they're when you see them, they're very strong visually. I mean, they're all out there visually. One thing that struck me, and something I'd like to sort of bring up slightly, and it's again from my perspective on things, is it interesting his choice of photographer for the advertising campaigns. Because Marc's worked very well with Jürgen, who I absolutely love what Jürgen does, so please don't say anything about it. Marc's worked with Jürgen for the last 10 years, 15 years. It's a really long relationship in fashion for advertising campaigns and perfumes and everything else. And it's funny how different Jürgen's work is to Marc's work. What you see on a catwalk is very different from the image you see in the magazines for the ads. I think that's an interesting thing, and I think it's a clever thing as well.
Well, because Marc's collections, I was going to mention this and ask what you thought about it. There's such, because it ties to the Rodarte sisters as well, there's such an element of kind of showmanship and almost something theatrical to them, and it's so different to what Jürgen does. And but I think that's the confidence in Marc, is that he's...
Don't you think that Marc maybe gets a little perverted pleasure about the challenge that Jürgen's wrong?
Well, that's what I thought, even in those spots and then strike.
There's also the sort of thing that some designers don't actually want the photographer to re-photograph their work. And I used to work for Yohji Yamamoto. He'd often say, don't show me the clothes, show me my dream. Surprise me. You know, Lee McQueen, on the work of him, I was always so frustrated because he wouldn't want to photograph his clothes. And there are some designers that don't want to do that. They've done their collection, they're sort of spent, and then they want something else. And I think from Marc...
Look at those long dresses, they're wonderful, aren't they? I mean, from a buyer's perspective, that show is a dream because, you know, the buyer, however they buy that collection, it's going to look awesome in the shop. You know, they're almost using the styles as the colour palettes, and the clothing is the black and white, that's a given, but the styles are actually the colour palette.
Yeah, it's so savvy as well, because what I liked about it is you can see sort of young kids who love fashion wearing that t-shirt or wearing a version of that t-shirt that they'll pick up somewhere, and then you can also see sort of incredible fashion icons wearing these gorgeous dresses, and it's one of those collections where it kind of anyone can be a piece of Marc, and I think that's something he does.
He's even giving a gift to the high street. Isn't he really? I mean, that's a very clear message.
But it's stripes, and we'll see them everywhere, and this is the way we saw spots everywhere.
Somebody just fill me in, because I don't know. What's the difference between Marc Jacobs and Marc by Marc Jacobs?
Marc by Marc is his second line, his diffusion line.
What's the stylistic difference?
It's much easier, more denims, softer, easier silhouettes.
So will he take this and soften it down for his Marc by Marc Jacobs?
He tends to have a different inspiration. He doesn't do a diluted version of this. He goes for a different inspiration altogether.
It's more accessible than Marc by Marc.
It's more sort of
commercial. Lower price, more commercial, and it's more.
I think this is aimed at the sort of the sassy gossip girl plus, and then Marc by Marc is the college girl.
Right.
Don't you think that those long dresses that in this show, I mean, they look so fresh and young, don't they? But don't you think they're a wonderful antidote to all those little mini dresses, X Factor, Scene and Celebrity? It's just so refreshing to see that, you know.
I do think that this, I mean, particularly New York, I think it's something of New York. I do think it is quite demure this season. I don't think we have had tits out, plunging necklines and all of that. Though? That tends to come around Milan.
But I mean, in New York, who would do that? Who would be the plunging neckline merchant?
You have your sexy
Zach, Posen, Marchesa, you could have that at DVF.
Were they more restrained this time?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Well, do you, New York's always been kind of slick and glamorous, and there's that kind of element of kind of easy glamour, you know, that kind of street style thing. Whereas I think this season it's been almost more kooky in a way, you know, more demure and slightly more kind of style it in the way you want, wear it in the way you want, and a bit more kind of easy.
Yeah. Nick, do you think that's interesting, the way they've done the lighting for the Marc Jacobs show with those spotlights? That looks very clean. And
yeah, no, it's good. I did an album cover for King. Do you remember King, the band?
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, remember King. With the same thing with the spotlights going straight down. So that's what it reminded me.
Would you say that that's flattering for makeup and face?
Well,
you know, you want the models to
twice. So you've got the model in the spotlight, which is coming down from above. So that's a pool of light on the floor. But then they've got a very flattering light on the model. They've got a spotlight. You know, see, old Hollywood light is slightly above the nose.
I think that's great. It's almost like created a set.
But for a runway photographer, that is a living nightmare because you've got the girls coming out in such fast succession. It was a 6-minute show. You cannot get a single shot.
It was over in 6 minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah, but fast bursts are the best shows. I mean, they leave such an impact.
But for Chris Moore or for a runway photographer, look, because you ideally want to get a cutout of a single girl to do your look, and I think that would have been a really tricky one. I imagine there was quite a lot of.
But I love the contradiction between the stripe and then you have that really clear circle.
Yeah, but you know what? You send that image to one of the newspapers for coverage, and they're going to email you back and say, "Have you got it on a white background?"
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or or they'll get, "Oh, do you have a picture of a dolly bird on the front row with the tits out?"
Excellent.
That they would want something a little bit more.
You mentioned Chris Moore having a problem. Did you see the Imitation of Christ show, which was actually shown at a gallery in Chelsea? Yes, where the models actually, they were all sorts of young. There were kids there and old, young, different sizes, bodies, and the clothes were actually on the floor, and each model had a mirror, and they had to just get dressed and. It was quite bizarre actually, because first of all, how the hell can the photographers capture that? But this kind of serene comfortness and happiness from the models, because actually that's how you behave in your own bedroom when you're trying on clothes. So they had to become immune to the audience, and that's exactly what I think she gave the show some kind of title saying it's not about the clothes.
The best show ever. I'm obsessed with this designer, so it's a bit Amit Banan, the menswear designer. He did a show where it was 8 couples in bed, and they got up and the girlfriends dressed the men in the menswear, and then they kind of walked, and it was so much about an attitude. And I'm sure for photographers it was an absolute nightmare, because you had 8 beds with couples pretending to be asleep. It was kind of more of a show. But those kind of collections, I think, where the designer has the confidence to say, you know, I'm going to use a spotlight, I'm going to have my models getting dressed, it's quite nice in a way, because it moves beyond this kind of the speed of fashion. It has to look good on style.com, it has to kind of be up on the internet.
I think that's what Jeremy Scott did when he'd been doing his big Paris shows. It was almost like, you know, where does it go from here? And that's why he's kind of got into that period of doing those performance shows, just because it was almost like, you can't just keep doing this. I think the designers have to keep changing the dynamic.
They go through phases of being theatre and running off runway, or up and down in a straight line when things need to be commercial. But I remember going to Margiela shows where you just saw swinging hangers coming backwards and forwards, and you know, different people have different ways of doing it. I do think nothing beats a girl walking up and down. It's quite, because you need to communicate it with people. And I think back when you were trying to do lookbooks, or just sort of like simply communicate, this is the clothes, this is the look, how it goes together, you know, you don't want to sort of, but I think that the Marc show is very, very clever and very strong. I'm curious to see how Rodarte are going to present. I see that there are lots of exciting tweets coming in.
I'd like to talk a bit about Rodarte actually, because I think in some ways polar opposites to Marc, but in many ways you have those kind of elements that are the same. You have that sort of the element of theatre and fantasy and kind of showmanship about their shows. Are you guys fans of Rodarte? Have you followed their work?
Me? I'm a big fan of the fact that they do what they want to do, not gratuitously, but they don't seem to follow anyone. They definitely have their own voice. And I think in New York, where, you know, the old school of New York is Calvin Klein, Armani, big fashion houses, Donna Karan, it's very refreshing to see young designers coming through that the establishment, like Anna Wintour, are picking up on, who do have their own voice and don't seem to be put under the pressure to conform to how buyers or whatever, they're doing something very interesting.
But having said that, I think they have been getting more commercial more recently. I think especially their last collection, which is up here, but also the collection before that, kind of
The Van Gogh one.
Yeah, moving even more towards things that are sellable and viable, like those Van Gogh dresses. But also
I
doing
think
separate.
when Rodarte burst onto the scene, I think we had just had Christopher Kay and Erdem and all of those that generation burst onto the scene in London. And I think New York was thrilled to have a new duo to nurture as their own cookie.
And it was refreshing to us watching New York. Thank goodness New York have got something young
and it was
fresh.
really nice to see, you know, as well as the big players, that there was fresh blood coming through.
Proenza Schuler and Alexander Wang. It was like almost like a nice
new... It was like a really nice new wave of designers coming through, and the two girls have such a lovely energy about them, and there's such girls that you think, oh yeah, no, I'd want to hang out with you. You know, they've got really nice attitude, and sort of they don't sort of sit in this sort of mould of what you would expect a fashion designer to be. You'd see them more reading fairy stories and eating chocolates down by the river, and I think that whimsical approach. No, I think they've got such a nice whimsy about them that they've got a nice thing to nurture.
Looking at Twitter in the run up to the show as well, they've got a lot of support, like women really root for them. And I think we saw that on Twitter in the build up
too. Lots of the comments when they started, and even every show you get this, people always say, oh, it's fashion for fashion's sake, and it's this idea of fantasy, and you know, they create these beautiful things, and you get caught up in their story, and every one of their collections has this kind of story and this idea, and I quite like the way that it's very unmanufactured, the shows. You know, they almost like worry about the piece. They don't worry how it's all going to form, and actually the jarring in the shows is what's quite attractive about them and makes them a little bit offbeat and unusual.
Studio Betak, I think, to do their shows. He's very good at making it. First of all, I'm a huge fan of Rodarte. I think they're brilliant, both of them. Love seeing the shows. I'm just an enormous fan of what they do. I think they're quite interesting because they're actually very, very American, and they show a very interesting vision of American woman, which isn't the kind of Calvin Klein or the Ralph Lauren woman. It's a woman of kind of Badlands and, you know, the Midwest, and
it's a much
darker,
lady.
It's a Bonnie and Clyde woman. There's
an undercurrent.
It's always that kind of slightly darker, you know, kind of outside in the country. It's an interesting vision of American. It's very, very American in a way which I'm delighted to see. And I think, differently to Marc, they are very artistic fashion designers. Now, I'm not sure if you can have an artistic and a non-artistic fashion designer without sounding like the non-artistic one. I'm not being rude about them, but they're closer to art than they are to fashion in a lot of ways. I'm an enormous fan of theirs. I've followed their work for some time now, and I met them both, and they're very nice girls.
But that's interesting what you say about they're very American, because what I've found over the years is when these new designers come through in New York, where we think, hey, this is cool, this could be really interesting on the big stage, they're almost trying to be the cool of Europe. But they have definitely got something that, like you say, is more American.
Yeah, I think it's a great vision of America as well.
Yeah.
It's all a vision I love
New
from the
America.
1970s films, and you know, from the sort of, and the collection that we worked with them on, which was 2010, I think. You know, their influence was a little town in Mexico where these dreadful murders of women happen, and you know, basically every dawn there would be a few more dead women lying on the outside, and they're dreadful. I would actually kind of
the maquiladora workers.
Yes, exactly. And to take that as you know, and do a very strong collection.
It's quite a brave thing to do.
I do think that they're interesting, but they are, you know.
Because we were talking about show notes earlier. They were great show notes.
I want to talk to you a bit, because we all kind of talked about how they've built themselves, and you said women are rooting for them, and I want to talk to you, given your expertise, about how they've managed to sort of build themselves as a brand, because they are very new. You know, their first collection was spring/summer 2006, I think it was, and they've kind of managed to maintain this idea around themselves that they are kind of very artistic fashion designers, as Nick said, and very focused on kind of creativity. But then they've done a huge number of collaborations. Like they did the range for Target. They've also done things like Black Swan. They've done a lot of art-related collaborations. And they are worn very frequently by celebrities, but they've still kind of maintained the sense of sort of separation.
It's not an obvious celebrity brand, is it? And I think the fact that they don't seem to worry about that, it could be more calculated than the impression I'm given. That's what lures me to it, actually, the fact that they don't seem to court it.
And how do you think about the way they sort of launched themselves? Because you've obviously worked with a lot of new designers, and they kind of appeared. They did this collection of 10 looks, and then they were on the cover of Women's Wear Daily. They have a very sort of successful story of how easy it is to
but if they feel
yourself.
those 10 looks are very polished, they've had the confidence to think, okay, that's it.
Do you think that's a message that other sort of people starting out, to have that confidence and kind of have that sense of authenticity?
The goalposts have completely changed. You see how it's changed over the years. There are absolutely no rules out there. I mean, you know, back in the day, if a designer wanted to be noticed, they'd have a guerrilla show in the street outside the Ralph Lauren show.
Yeah.
But now there's just absolutely no rules, and I think, you know, even with Fashion East in London this season, I don't think they're doing a big, huge runway show. It's going to be an installation. That's going to be exciting and interesting, and we can't wait for that, you know. So I think, you know, you can just do whatever you want now, as long as it's polished and it's what you believe in and it's showing what you're trying to convey. There's just no rules.
But also I think charm is half of the game. I think the Rodarte girls came and charmed New York, and they delighted the buyers, and like everybody was rooting for them because they were, I think
They were decent.
But I think part of the package of when you meet a young designer, if they're engaging and charming and you are rooting for them, you want to protect them and nurture them. If somebody came in and was very arrogant and offy and, well, I want to conquer the world, you wouldn't actually help them. But these girls are sort of very warm. They project an image of being very warm girls that you want to sort of help
They've
and
got
nurture.
an American humbleness about them.
I think that's why they've got all this support, you know.
We've got images in, so should
Oh,
we have
great.
a look?
Have we got all of them in?
I think
How
we do have all of
exciting.
them, yeah.
Should we? Oh, I won't look. When
Yeah, don't look.
Yeah, we
Really
go
bad.
backwards.
Maybe now is the time to have some champagne
Yeah,
as well.
should we toast
Yeah,
our designers
let's toast
with
our
that?
designers.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the first look. It's Jessica Stam opening.
Gosh, they're strong looks, aren't they?
And these are dresses when there seems to be a message so far that it's not dresses, it's separates and layering.
Yeah, I don't know whether they switched it around so that they punched home their dress message at the beginning.
Yeah. The shoes look very sporty, don't they?
Yeah.
That kind of heeled look.
The music, just so you know, it was The Cure and The Breeders that was the soundtrack as
fun.
well.
Oh, really? Their music is great. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
they put a lot of focus on the music.
A lot of laser cutting. A
You
lot of the designers have done laser cutting this season.
Yeah.
I thought there was like a hint of the older liar in old Victoria Beckham show as well.
Jason Wu's skirt we loved with the cut leather.
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I think Elia's cutting has really inspired quite a lot of New York so far this season.
So is this what we were expecting from Rodarte?
Not at all.
No, not
But
at all.
you don't really know what to expect from
This
Rodarte.
is clean. This is clean modern America.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't actually expect it to be so minimal.
What I love about them, and I
I
think they've done
love
it
the
really well,
triplicate tuxedo collars
Yeah.
there.
it's the combination of sort of something quite antiquated, but also something very futuristic. And they've
Yeah.
done that in individual looks before, with a kind of a vintage look dress with a very modern shoe. You can see that here.
Do you think that's metal, that belt?
I think it's. We can
Yeah,
check
it
Because
looks.
Chanel did those collars in actual solid metals, didn't they?
Yeah,
That
that
was
looks
quite
like a
interesting.
metal one.
It's the medieval feel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yes, because you said it was the medieval.
Yeah.
Show notes. Show notes.
It's a metal embroidered dress.
That's quite
Okay, so
wonderful. That is
that's
wonderful.
attached to the dress, do you think?
I wonder if it's sold separately. Do you remember the Dolce & Gabbana big belt that everyone started wearing?
It goes completely against Susie Menkes with her separates comment.
That's an interesting jacket.
It almost looks like it's a reverse.
The hair looks interesting.
It looks like it's been styled reverse. I wonder whether it was cut the other way round. It looks like it's.
It is.
The real.
That well spotted. Yes, that's a.
I don't know whether that's a clever styling
No, I
thing
think it's. I think it's a clever observation, Camilla.
There's a sense of armour to these, and it goes.
Yeah.
We talked a lot yesterday about the designers who women love are the ones that promote a strong woman in whatever form, and I think that's something that Rodarte always do. Even though some of their clothes are very fragile when they, in their earlier collections when they did the sort of torn elements, and it's very different to this, but it's the same.
They're
message.
not clothes for bimbos, are they?
No.
If you look at their girls that come out.
A bit like Alexander Wang's show where the models are almost warriors.
Yeah.
Well, this is very fierce, strong women here.
Yeah.
It's almost got a. To me, it feels like it's got
That's
a
nice
little,
punky look, isn't it? Got a
little
punk
nod
feel
to
about it. And is that
Balenciaga.
symbolism
Yeah,
on the front of it?
Yeah.
Balenciaga.
It's probably some medieval samurai tribe.
I like
Because the hair's quite samurai, isn't it?
Yeah.
And but the sort of
And
like the
ear
front.
cuff.
The
And the
front.
loose cut of the biker shape as well is great, isn't it? That's definitely new. That whole fitted silhouette of little crop jackets.
But there's still that sense which you always get with Rodarte of craftsmanship and
Yes.
attention to detail and hand finishing, which I think I love that they never lose that, no matter how simple it is or how complicated in this case the item they're producing is.
Well, this almost looks sort of demi-couture punky, doesn't
I'll
it?
tell you
the
something,
way-
it makes me want a waistcoat.
Yeah, waistcoat's back.
A very keen on the fringing, aren't they? I like the clean ones more, like the fold, the drape there.
Do you think that's got a hint of Comme des Garçons, you know, when it had a smaller outfit inside the silhouette of? A little bit of a kind of pushing in feeling when you look at that.
Nick, what are you thinking sort of visually? How's this striking you? How would you present?
It's exciting me visually. There are some dresses and some outfits which are easy to photograph immediately.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily always need that. Sometimes it's good to discover the piece by working with it. And you know that there's enough, you know, inside that piece of clothing. When you're photographing or filming a piece of clothing, you're unpicking the designer's narrative that has been viewed into that piece of clothing. And of course, with something like Rodarte, you've got a lot of narrative to unpick. There's a lot of information in those clothes, which is great for an image.
Do you like to work with the narrative, or do you like to push against the narrative?
No, I always work with it. My job really is to communicate the designer's vision. That's what I'm doing.
And when you have a mix of, you know, when you're doing editorial where you have a mix of designers, how do you compose the different narratives together to make a...
It depends. There's lots of different ways of working. So it depends on the style. So it's someone like Simon Foxton, where a lot of it will be brought together. He might have made some himself. So there's lots of different things going on. So really you're interpreting Simon Foxton's vision.
Right.
So it's a stylist's vision you're interpreting. Or if you're working with somebody, maybe for Vogue, it tends to be more of a complete look. And then you go back to the designer. But of course, you know, when you're asked to do a fashion story, you're always given a theme or an idea or a story.
A starting point.
A starting point. You've got to kind of embellish. So you're using it a different way. When you're working, doing an advertising campaign for a designer, you're very much delivering the designer's vision. It's your job to do so in an exciting way. So.
I've seen some of the projects on SHOWstudio where Nicola Formichetti, it's almost like developing organically as it goes along, so it's growing without that brief. It can become what he wants it to be as it goes along.
Do you think it is those designers who have a story in the way that the Rodarte sisters always do, this very kind of fixed narrative that managed to kind of really shine? So if you look at someone like McQueen or someone like Galliano, where they had that kind of excitement and that story to what they were doing, do you think those are the ones that always somehow manage to shine?
I think as a designer is proposing an interesting world, those are the ones that will shine. I mean, you know, I say you're looking at the narrative of the piece of clothing and you're delivering that. That narrative is exciting and complex and, you know, full of different aspects, and it's very easy to deliver an exciting picture of it.
Because isn't that what fashion should be about, like transformation?
Yeah, but also the richer the narrative, the more you know about the woman, the more you know where she could wear it, how she would take her tea, how she would wear her hair, what proportion she would like, where her hem would sit, as much as what her mood would be. Then that helps you in sort of like unpick and get part of the story yourself. You know, you can see yourself as one of the girls or wearing the girls, or if you're shooting it, how you can be inspired by it. And
it's like what you said about the Marc Jacobs show being 6 minutes long. You know, what kind of sensory experience can you actually give your audience, the people who are writing about it, conveying those messages in those 6 minutes? Are you going to spray a scent into the audience? What's the music, you know?
Oh no, you go next.
No, I was just going to say, that's sadly what we're missing with the still imagery here.
Yeah, I was going
you're
to
missing
say,
the music, you're not seeing the clothes move, and you're not getting any of that sense of kind of, you know, lighting and spectacle in that way.
Because like looking at this skirt rather, you don't know whether it's a clunky load of fabric or whether it flows in a soft... I mean, I'd be interested if that was a soft silk that just fluttered, or whether that was a clunky plastic.
What does the show notes say?
Well, I think
it's silk.
This outfit showing us actually is the same concept but on different fabrics. So actually it probably is fluttery lower down, but higher up that's quite stiff. And then you've got this idea of kind of metal over the fabric, which is quite interesting. I like the idea of jewellery over clothing. You know, so you've got maybe a higher neck, but the jewellery comes around it.
So just so you know, the two words I asked the Rodarte PR, Juliana, to give me at least some information to go on. She would only give me 2 words. One was role play, 3 words. Role play was one, and medieval was the other one. Which is interesting when you start to look at this, and also interesting after just they provide a vision of American woman. Medieval doesn't really count then, does it? So where are we going with this? And it's a very, I think for Rodarte, it's a very interesting proposal.
Oh, I think that does look medieval there. You can see
almost
like
it doesn't. I'm just saying it's interesting because it's not a vision of America, is it?
No, but I think, no, quite. But I think it's really strong.
Is that Joan Smalls?
Is it? I think it is.
Yeah, I think it is.
I think I would have cried if I had only been given 2 words as a prompt. I don't think I would. If I was
role playing, I mean, everybody, we're all role playing.
We're all role playing.
John Galliano used to give me 2 words for the whole campaign. Trailer trash was one of them, or 2.
Oh, nothing like an open brief, Nate. Anyway, should we make a toast to
maybe
we should, because this is the memory of 9/11, or you know,
to the memory of 9/11.
Yeah.
Go there.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, it's a little more serious toast, but this should be also to the Rodarte sisters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cheers.
I can't quite get you, Mandy, but I will gesture serenely towards you.
Cheers.
These are nice glasses, Nick. I wouldn't expect anything less.
Absolutely. So, just putting aside something, because I don't want to do it in the middle of the Rodarte sisters show, I think we do need to mention Knight and Mandi
Yeah.
sometime, though, because I think as you said earlier, it's like ignoring the elephant in the room. But let's stick with the Rodarte sisters.
I'm interested in this weave here because it's what I love.
It's
You
a
mentioned this
good
with the Marc
Latisse
and the
weave.
music and this idea of the whole
I
show.
love that sweater.
But if you see their nails from the collection, which I'll
Whoa.
just flick to quickly and get back to it, again, it's that weave. And I love
Nails
that.
are incredible.
They're amazing. But
Mandy,
it's
would
the
you
idea
do
of the
that?
whole
You're a
show.
nail fan.
But,
Yes.
but these are the layers now that people promote their show, you know, just those nails, the hair, the beauty, the portals that go through these shows that feed out.
Mm.
I mean, you know, you're showing the nail there, but actually that is a vital part of getting the message from those designers out there.
Yeah, but it shows that every little detail counts,
Yeah.
doesn't it? And I think those are the shows that stand out, you know, when somebody bothers to go right down to, look how considered
And
Mandy is,
people
right
don't
down to-
realise that, you know, there's makeup tests, there's meetings, and when, you know, and again, the designer will probably give 2 words to that nail artist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Medieval nails, and she arrives with a
Yeah.
woven leather
mean, Latisse.
nail.
I know we mentioned the gowns when they first came out because it was that striking, that rush of sort of gorgeous dresses, but from a sort of commercial perspective, it's a savvy collection. You've got that beautiful jewellery, but also the separates and something like that skirt. That's so wearable. And you
Is
can
she
see-
wearing a 24-hour girdle?
I think it's all one sweater. Should we add 20? Yeah, it's black painted and woven champagne top.
So that's a top and a skirt, or is it a dress?
It's a top and a skirt. And Camilla, actually, lots of references on our Twitter. People are saying that it is very, very Balenciaga. So you're not alone.
Hmm.
Yeah.
American transfer.
Yeah, that's a signature
Yeah.
top in again. Just
These kind of
that's the same colour wave that we've seen, isn't it?
There's
Yeah.
a lot of bursts of red in the shows, aren't there? A
It's
lot
much
of bursts of red.
Yeah, very colourful in terms of lots of mixed colour. I'm interested because we've had a lot of this sheer throughout the collections. We had it with Jason Wu, we had it with Altuzara, these kind of sheer pieces where you can see through. Just really beautiful.
But also a lot of black and sort of heavy colours for summer.
Yeah.
Summer. It is a heavy collection for summer,
Yeah.
especially those tops and the idea of armour. It
Yeah.
seems to be heavy.
Unless they think there's a big fight that they've got to emotionally get through next summer. Maybe that's the play. Carly
love
is
Carly.
such a beautiful
We
walker.
love
She's-
Carly.
Amazing. She's absolutely incredible. But I think that's what's so nice is
She's brought a real
embodying that
lightness
dress,
to
isn't
that.
she? And,
Yeah.
and,
She's done a lot of the shows, hasn't she?
Yeah.
I like the contrast of the lightness to the light against the heavy, sorry. I think that that's quite interesting, and the way it's high tech one moment and then it goes to the medieval theme the moment. I mean, it's not so medieval that it's not forward looking. I think when you say medieval, you do think, oh my goodness, how historical are you going to reference? Because you don't want
How many years
costume
BC?
designers. Yeah, you don't want costume designers. And I think that sometimes when you look at shows and they say that they're referencing the 20s or they're referencing ancient Egypt or the Renaissance, you do slightly worry that it's looking too back. But you know, even though they gave only 2 words, I think it is a very modernist collection.
But I think
Isn't
that's
it?
something that's worth mentioning with Marc as well. It's even though there was kind of a very obvious decade reference there, and he's done decades before. He did the 20s and he's done the 70s. They never look gimmicky or they never look costumey, and I think that's what's the skill of someone like Rodarte is they immerse themselves in this idea, but they still produce these intensely sort of covetable clothing. And
It's very important to the designers, though, that the audience has their own interpretation. I think they enjoy that. You know, they might have an idea of how they're presenting it, but they actually enjoy different people's take on the message.
Really interesting sleeving. It would sit nicely alongside the Alexander Wang in store or in editorial.
Yeah,
Is that the closing look?
I think that is the oh no, this is the closing.
Oh, no, that's the first look.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
closing look there.
Well spotted again, Camilla.
Just gorgeous. So what are the first reactions? Oh, well, we've already had them.
We had our first reaction. Well, first, I think it's a success, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a
It's
strong
Yeah, I
choice,
think
isn't
it's
it?
very
strong
strong.
statement, a strong collection. different for Rodarte, not what they
Yeah,
normally do.
no,
Or
not what
I
maybe
like, I like the idea that you've got this
direction.
warrior element, but actually there's a fragility with the sheer bottom part. And also a lot of the pieces where it's the bottom and the top, they don't necessarily need to go with the top that they were shown in. There's a bit of a loushness about it as well.
I like the handcrafting against the street style, the quite edgy sort of.
Do you really think that you can see that in a show? Do you really think that we can see that craftsmanship from these images?
I think that's
Yeah. If you click on to some of the fringing or some of the sort of.
So you can even see it there if you look at.
No, but not. I mean, there are more obvious pieces where you can see that that you'd know that would be tricky. I mean, that's a beautiful piece of drape cutting.
I think you have to bear in mind as well that this is how people consume fashion images. So it's.
I don't know what their price points would be like for a piece like that.
I know, it's incredible.
I mean, their price points are quite ouch, aren't they? I would love to see that, for example, go back 47 off the frame to see what it's like the other way around.
Yeah, see what the back's like.
Yeah, because you don't know
that's
whether
the funny thing, when you give images to the newswires, if you said to style.com, oh, it's very important for this look to show the back as well, they can't.
They can't.
Yeah,
so
you get that
I wanted
loss.
to ask whether you think that people will have to respond to the fact that pretty much, you mentioned sort of all the tons of people who click straight on to view the images. Do you think people are going to have to respond?
We're hungry for it. I mean, the first thing I click on when I look at the New York shows is who's on the front row. I have to admit that, and then they've got these backstage pictures and the close-ups, and that's the only way, if you're really hungry for it, that you can actually home in on the accessories, which to a lot of us is the only access you can get to buying those designers, because those are the things you can only near afford.
Yeah. Or a lipstick or a nail, which is why the nails
and the beauty,
or the details.
you get beauty click as well.
We can have a look at some of the close-ups here actually. That would help.
It's very wintry, don't you think?
But we've said that with other collections. We said that with the Thayskins Theory, although it was a beautiful collection, that it was heavy and it was wintry.
I mean, there is a heaviness to this, and there's
a lightness as well.
Yeah, I mean that's beautifully crafted.
I do love, you mentioned it, Camilla, before, but this idea of that kind of historical element combined with those really modern elements. So whether it's the shoe, but even it's just the way the girls have done their hair, kind of on one side, and you've got that ear cuff, which is
it's
very
a hair
street
piece
style.
that goes
So we talk about the
over
ear cuff, because I think that's
we can have a closer
that's a bit like the Givenchy nose ring, isn't it? Is this going to be the ear piece of the season?
Yeah, the street style piece.
Is it? Was it a dragon or something?
Yeah,
it's a dragon.
It's a dragon one.
It's I've got the exact note here. Yeah, it's metal dragon earrings.
Okay.
I will not be without one next.
Well, little things like that, you'd be surprised.
I
that will
love
encourage
those
people to
shoes.
wear the hair up.
Yeah.
I think those shoes are fabulous. They're a slightly more accessible for a human being version of the Balenciaga ones.
And a hint of the Nicholas Kirkwood Erdem ones as well, with that square heel on a sporty look.
I haven't seen the
I like the photos.
No, I am seeing.
Oh, you are,
yeah, the American.
I like them more from a jaunty angle.
Yes, we're enjoying them more, aren't we, from that angle?
Yeah.
Very short photography.
That hair, go back to that hair, is wonderful.
It's a hairpiece, Adele.
Great.
Oh, is it
There.
Adele doing it?
Yeah.
Adele.
It's not a typical Adele, is it?
If you saw her, she did Jason Wu, didn't she, with that gorgeous...
Yeah, she did Jason. She seems to have done most of the ones we've been doing this time. So that's the frontispiece panel.
You see, we're getting the craftsmanship with these images, aren't we?
Yeah.
Is everybody watching this able to see these images that we're going
Yeah,
through?
yeah.
Oh, great.
But I love the contrast of the movement, the stiffness there with the little flippy stare.
Yeah.
So will these pieces be detachable when you buy them? Would you get the body with...
Is that Deborah as well? Deborah with the hard...
Deborah, yeah.
I don't know. Is it? Yeah, it could be.
This is a dress with a printed top as well.
Yeah, because I might maybe leave the breastplate off. Well, not if it was new.
But those breastplates are great. I mean, they're a wonderful idea. It's making me think, if I wanted to kind of have the look next season, I don't need the outfit, but if I got one of those breastplate pieces and put it over, even jeans and a shirt, you've got that look, haven't you? So I wouldn't be surprised to see corsets appearing on the high street for that.
Well, Michelle Obama in that huge Alaya corset belt, that sort of shifted everything.
Who would have thought that the Alaya belt would become such a stalwart?
I like the way they've softly padded around the hips as well. I think that's a really nice feminine curve to such a sort of strong collection.
This is a lot more of a complex collection the Marc Jacobs one. And I don't mean in any way that to sound derogatory to the Marc Jacobs one.
I think you've hit the nail on the head by saying complex with this one, haven't you?
But it still has that kind of standout appeal. You can see their vision, but it's still complex. And
it's a bold vision. It's a very standout vision as well.
But that's what's so clever about them, is they managed to maintain this fan base, and they managed to kind of always seem very.
And it's a different customer to Marc Jacobs, isn't it? The person who likes Marc Jacobs isn't necessarily going to go for this.
Well,
I think also you have to. I think you're challenged by Rodarte a lot more than the Marc Jacobs, and I think again the fact that they challenge the audience is part of the attraction to them, for me anyway.
I mean, Marc is a very virtuoso designer. He knows exactly how to do it, and he can do, a bit like Picasso, he can do a few strokes and communicate a message, whereas different people do it different ways. If you look at the caviar beading spinning around there on those shapes, it's really complex
That is incredible. I mean, really, that is incredible. We never got that from a runway shot.
I even love the detailing there. I don't know if you can see it.
You see, that's why you love watching them in real life at the shows, because you can see the weight as it moves past you.
So you can probably hear the metal as it goes past you as well.
I know, that was the thing of the couture shows. They always used to say that the seats must be close. There was, 1940s review of the couture shows, and Carmel Snow requested that she always sat close enough so that she could hear the taffeta crunch and the dresses scoop over her shoes. And if she couldn't hear the taffeta crunch, then she wasn't prepared to take her seat.
When I was at the couture shows, I got shouted at by the photographers at the end of the aisle because my feet were sticking and my legs.
Oh yeah, no, you will get.
You're not allowed to. The worst thing in show imagery as a PR is somebody the lining of somebody's Burberry coat in shots. That's the biggest crime.
I just kept crossing my legs every time I get shouted.
Well, the Dior
because I didn't know it was metal. What are they going on about?
Yeah, no, because basically it's like your foot featuring some Dior couture.
Did anyone shout out long legs?
I love that moment of fashion show, when they all yell at you to uncross your legs and sit back.
What the hardest thing about going to shows, you forget actually that if the production is that the seats are all flat and it isn't a raised platform, if you're not even on the second row, you're in agony because all you want to see the shoes, and it's really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I would prefer to watch the shows online than sit third or fourth row and see somebody's shoulder.
Those pants are hardcore, aren't they? They're great.
Very sexy as well, which I like it when they do something a bit.
I think it'd be very interesting to see what
you've just given Rankin an idea for a shoe.
Yeah.
And what Jonathan Kay or Katie Grand or Kate England or Alistair, what are they going to make of this collection? And I think it's very interesting because you'll get lots of different visions from it. Marc's collection, that was great, and we loved it. Yeah. But that's going to give you one very strong vision. And you'll see it every time. But this,
Katie England will have ordered those trousers by now.
But I love that, you're right, you could see it done and it could be made to be so sexy and so strong and very warrior-like, but you can also have that kind of romantic, fantasy, medieval sort of
a lot of the stuff is very romantic.
Yeah, I mean, you could see those trousers on Amanda Harlick and you could see them very differently on
Daphne.
Yeah.
And you can see different permutations of it as well, can't you? You can imagine.
You can see the historical, the
romantic. You can see the jewellery inspiration. All those brands that are inspired for their jewellery collections or, footwear.
I love the chain. I love the subtle things that they do that keeps their theme, but then with such a kind of almost a modern kind of space agey 60s-y.
Yeah.
There is an element of that beautiful actress from the
Mara.
Yeah, the Dragon
Rooney
Tattoo.
Mara.
Yeah. Givenchy's favourite lady.
Yeah, well, she might be their muse, but
I love the idea of the embellishment around the neck becoming almost a jewellery. That's wonderful.
Well, also the way the neckline of the Go Back, the neckline of that one goes, it's almost as if they've played with the jacket in reverse. It's almost like the colour of the jacket is the cuff around the neck, and then you have a much softer version of
You see, Camilla, they could have given you that in the show notes, but they didn't want to ruin it. They wanted you to find that.
Well, I know some people do want you to do a bit more work, but I mean...
Do you think there's a lot, sorry to interrupt, do you think a lot of influences from other designers here?
Yeah.
I know we all influence photographers, influenced by photographers.
Well, I think everybody's influenced by...
I'm seeing a bit of Margiela, earlier Margiela.
A bit of Margiela, a bit of Victor and
Roll. The minimalism of Margiela, isn't it? That's coming through.
But also the sort of, the surrealist qualities, the back of my jacket, that sort of thing.
Maybe they went to the Elsa Schiaparelli Prada exhibition at the Met.
Maybe they did, absolutely.
Well, I'm sure they were at the Met.
Sure they were, yes.
I think what's great about this is it's an obvious theme and we're picking it up in every outfit, but it doesn't take over. I think that's something they do really well. You get these kind of...
there is a bit of Dali in there as well, isn't there?
I love those shoes.
I've got a pair of Manolos just like that are coming out.
There was something a friend of mine made a comment to me that, you know, maybe they shouldn't show in America, maybe they're more European.
I think
That's
they
a really
are a
interesting
very
point.
European aesthetic, but I think if they showed in Europe, they would get lost
Yes.
in the whole
That's what I love about them being in New
I think
York.
they
I mean,
stand
they're great
out.
because they really do stand out in New
Yeah,
York.
they
But
stand
should
out
they be
so
there?
much in New York.
Yeah,
I
love them in the
I
monster
think they've
shows
got
in New
such
York.
an American soul that they would feel disloyal to America if they didn't
They
show
work
in
Los
America.
Angeles,
And
No,
they're-
absolutely. But I mean, in terms of where they seem to fit in with their clothes, I'm actually
No,
not
but
one
I
who thinks
think-
that the fashion should
I
be
think
divided on
actually,
nationality.
I think they do have a very European style, and I think the fact that they would fit in so much in Europe means that they might be in danger of disappearing in Europe, so they're better
It's almost their
to
point.
jar.
It's like saying Erdem should move away from London. You know, it's a similar thing. Sometimes
Yeah.
the designers having such a notable point of difference is what makes them
Mm.
loved.
But,
And I
al-
think-
but also, does it matter where you live now with all the messages and information that you can
No.
get?
yeah.
No.
You know, Karen Walker is a New Zealand designer, and you know, she could have moved to the West at any point, and she chose to live in New Zealand. And actually, if she'd have moved and gone to one of the fashion capitals, I don't think she'd be as successful as she is now.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. Do you think there is, because Ruth mentioned this in our first broadcast, Ruth Hogwood, she said, I don't think you can even think of fashion in 4 cities anymore. And I think that's something the internet is doing, is kind of breaking down those ideas of cities, because the internet is global and the way we consume fashion is a lot more global. Do you think that would be a positive change?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing more conference calls now that are where you can see each other.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite amazing. You know, quite often when we're really, really busy and it's a bit crazy, I always think to myself, God, I could be doing this in the countryside.
Yeah.
But doesn't that screw with the whole season thing? So now we're doing autumn, winter. Yeah, and it's a global market, it's a global audience. So where's the relevance of dividing up into seasons in that way?
I think
seasons
seasons are becoming less and less relevant. I think with resort
Seasons are an
and
excuse
cruise.
to bring out your next.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're saying about those designers like Provence Schuler, Alexander Wang and Rodarte, is that they're new kids really, they're still relatively new, just like we regard Jonathan Saunders and Erdem and say, oh, they're the mainstay of the schedule. They're still young kids, they're still at the early stages of their
I
careers.
think magazines invented seasons to give themselves a hook for their editorial, and you know, not just, I'm not blaming magazines, but I think editorial invented trends and they invented the seasons so that they had something to hook around and everybody
You
followed
need a structure
suit.
though.
You need some form of structure or else it will, you know, I mean, God bless him, but Azzedine Alaïa shows as and when he fancies.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
everybody did it as and when he fancied, it'd be chaos.
Yeah, but
all
they-
over.
but these young-
Chaos, that's the thing. I think it's just a
I
breaking
think
down
now,
another system
I
revolve
think
around
now that there's the internet and people could live stream it, I think it'd be lovely every now and then you knew you had
But
a fashion show
these young
happening.
kids though, that their businesses are burgeoning and they're still in the early steps of their careers really. The problem is that they don't just do these 2 collections, they do eyewear, they do footwear. I mean really it can be too much for a lot of these designers. You know, there's a lot of responsibility, but one of the things that the American designers have got that you don't see from other designers, particularly in London, more and more in London, but I moved to New York just after 9/11, and the designers that used to come and see me, what was unbelievable about that was how they present themselves. You know, it's very professional. They're sewing an infrastructure from the start. They've got the business cards. The way that they present their work is in a lovely portfolio. It's all clear. So that's the advantage that a lot of the American designers have, the way that they sew that infrastructure from the off. So that when they they start licensing very quickly, so commercially they're very savvy.
A lot of what we talked about then kind of referenced the pace of fashion and kind of this continual slog of different collections. The slog's a bit too negative, but that kind of that rush. And I want to bring that back to Rodarte because that's something that I think, even though they've become very established, and as we all said, it's kind of the one that everyone looks forward to in New York, they've always managed to sort of stay away from that element of kind of cycle and continuous kind of putting something new out, and they've always managed to maintain that sense of kind of, I think it's kind of real thought and real sort of, every collection they do is very intimate and it's very considered. And how do you think they've managed to
I
kind
think
of
they
keep that?
protect themselves by not living in New York,
Yeah, they
not
take
living
themselves
in
out
the
of
middle of
them,
the rat race. I think
back
they
to
step
California.
Not getting
step
sucked too
out.
far into
Yeah.
it.
Do you think more designers should follow that kind of getting away and doing their own thing?
I think people need to do what works for them. I
Yeah.
think when you're starting, you have to be in the hub of a city so you can feed off people and feed off ideas and meet people, meet a PR, meet a buyer, meet a backer, find people that can help you on your way. But I do think once you've found your your system and your signature, but also these are a pair of sisters. They've got each other to sort of bounce ideas off. They've got a gang already.
They've got a lot of supporters as well.
You know,
but this is the same. It's what I call the Boudica syndrome. You know, those designers who almost like have this beautiful quality to the work, this kind of painstaking craftsmanship, where they're almost like they're not couture, but they're kind of above ready to wear, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because you know, I think Boudica have tried going on the couture schedule. It's kind of too old school. And
no, but you can't. Couture's got such a refined. Olivier Theyskens wants to join.
And they're not claiming to be that, but you can see the work, like you say, you know, the work that's gone into that in these close-up pictures, particularly.
I mean, I think it's a bit like labelling a model a supermodel and saying something's couture. I think couture is a very sort of rigid set of rules, but I think actually we're breaking into a new, maybe it's demi-couture, I don't know what it is, but this handcrafting is so specialised.
That's one of my favourite pieces, that jacket. It's wonderful, isn't it?
Armour's big, isn't it? It's like when everyone did we talked about the Game of Thrones collection.
Yeah, there is a hint of that, isn't there? I think Gwendolyn might need to order that jacket.
Yeah. So our reaction is impressed. What do you think of this as a kind of a symbol to sum up New York in a way? I know that the New York shows are still going, but as a standout from the season, is this one that you think people will refer to?
I like it. I think it's singular and it's confident.
Yeah, I think it's very assured of who they are, what they're doing, and I think it's quite a heroic, fierce collection. It's very modern, and I think it defines them well, and I think it plays with handcrafting as much as it pushes things forward and is modern. I think it's a strong collection.
Yeah, I think that it's one of the 3 or 4 strong ones we've seen from New York others. Jason Wu I thought was great.
Yeah.
I also think obviously Marc Jacobs will come out really strongly, and this will come out really strongly too, and also Alexander Wang. I think those are so far in New York, those are the ones that will stick out for me. Will be remembered.
I mean, I think this season New York's been about the modern. I think it's been very modernist. It's been very monochrome. It's been very sharp. I think
this incredible minimalism that's come through, which is a confident look, isn't it, for a woman to dress minimally, where you almost like, oh, I won't use that, and just be confident in the pieces you have.
I'm excited to see Calvin Klein at the end of the week, because I think that the modernity that everybody's doing this season will make what they're doing there seem very relevant again, because people tend to sort of start to I think people find the new direction at Calvin Klein that it's very modern, very minimal. I think sometimes they find that hard to pattern in with all the very elaborate and ornate
it's the history
designs.
of the brand, isn't it? You've got this preconceived conception,
and you've got a preconceived notion of what you're going to expect.
Camel dress is going to come down the runway straight away.
And Calvin shows are very difficult to sort of translate as a journalist, and putting them right at the end of the week, you are sort of like petered out and you want to phase in the new ones. But I think the strength of what we've seen in New York so far is the very sort of forward, futuristic looking clothes from Alex Wang, from elements of Rodarte, and I think that strength will pull through on Calvin.
You have to remember also that to show in New York you have to be very brave. These are the first ideas of the season coming through after the trade shows.
I'm interested in the design as you mentioned it, because I think in a way, and it's something we mentioned yesterday, and it's an idea of, I think what everyone's put forward with this minimalism that we've talked about in the modernity, it's an idea of strength, and I think partly it is a sign of the times, maybe a sign of the economic times in particular with the more sort of very minimal pieces. But it's this idea of strength and women wanting to wear clothes that give them that sense of strength, and there's not the same place for frivolity I think that there once was. And I think that's in a way been a nice thing to take from New York. It's making beautiful clothes that are based around a simple idea.
Yeah, no, I think there is definitely a strength. I've heard through the different broadcasts we've done over the last 3 or 4 days, that the idea of a powerful woman keeps coming back. I keep hearing people saying it. So maybe it's interesting that this is the beginning of our fashion month, isn't it? So we don't know where it's going to go, and what of these will the Rodarte sisters will able to crystallise some vision which we'll then see again and again, or will it be Marc Jacobs' vision, or what other visions will come in later? What will happen in the last few shows in Paris?
Or does it need to be? Does it need to be pocketed like that? Will it be a singular voice?
Well, you find it, don't you, Mandy? It does. You do get those things. We're all subject to the same influences, and all of a sudden everybody's using glow in the dark, for instance, and nobody's spoken to it. They're all,
Well, I remember when I used to be a buyer, we used to buy a designer before the shows quite often, and then by the time of the show, when the clothes came on the runway, there they were nothing like what we bought. Because by the time of their show, the designers had changed their mind. You know, you sometimes wonder to yourself, well, why does the designers kill themselves? Why do they work all night the night before? Why didn't they get it done earlier? But actually, they're going to the nth degree to get that last minute vision that's they're feeling for the show.
And that's sort of Camilla, who's worked closely with John for a long time, would John or will a designer have seen one of the early collections and then modify their collection from that? He's a designer now and showing in Paris. He's got 3 weeks, more or less, to change his initial vision. And is that something that happens?
But I think as you're working on a collection, as you become more and more familiar with the muse and the direction and where it's going. I mean, for couture shows, they would be fitting right up to 10 minutes before it ran onto the runway. Like it would be changing and evolving and it would be morphing.
Or he might have woken up and thought, oh, I know what fabric I want in it, and they're all scrambling to try and get that fabric and achieve that.
So Marc's done stripes, for instance. So if somebody further down the line, you know,
but Marc is a great example of but Marc is a great example of sort of, not in a rude way, but
it works the other way around actually. What they'll do is if they see something coming through that they planned, they'll decide, do I pretend I haven't seen it and just be me? Or should I actually take this out because I don't want to look like I've copied? There's a little bit of that goes on. Not with a designer like that, but...
And how many, sorry to interrupt, I'm fascinated. How many pieces come out of a collection? I mean, I worked a little bit with Lee McQueen on the Place of Atlantis collection, you know, and the end dress came out of the collection. At the last minute, he said, don't want to have it. So what percentage of dresses actually get made but don't get shown?
I mean, the thing is you have maybe 50, 60 sketchbooks worth of research. You have 12s, you have 3 stages worth of fittings. I mean, you're running the gauntlet of, you said like the entrance into the show that you have the bloggers, then you have the this, there are so many layers and stages that you have to get through. And you know, you would see something at toile or fitting stage that would be a completely different product further down the line, and it's how it evolves and the journey that it goes on. You could find a zip that inspires it, you could find a zip that on the research collection that suddenly has inspired something so far down the line, and you would think it was inconsequential, and it's almost like a murder mystery. You are a detective and you have to find every single clue that is dropped along the way.
There's lots of variables as well, like you know, there's this old story, especially in London, where is the model modelling in the show before? Will the model arrive in time? So quite often, not for just that reason, the model who was supposed to wear a certain outfit will put it on at the show, and even though they had a fitting, it might not fit, or the design might think, oh God, I don't like how it looks. And actually a lot of last minute decisions like that are made and things are cold. I've had that with accessories designers, you know, where they've said, oh, I've got these hats in this show, I'm so happy. And then the show happens and their hats weren't in the show. That is so common.
Or you've had girls going out on the red carpet and they suddenly decide at the last minute to wear something else completely different. It's all sort of...
most of them have a plan B, don't they? They always have a second outfit.
Stephen Jones tells great stories about his hats. John would kill a whole collection of hats.
He's good for
and
stories.
You have to reinvent them at the night. You know. So up until 5 in the morning, sewing beads on whatever it was.
Also, you have to know. They might be working late in the studio 2 nights the night before the show, and they're listening to some music that inspires an idea. And it's like, we've got to get that, you've got to get that tonight.
But I also think if you're too set and you have the collection and you stay too rigid, I think it takes real confidence, and the real star designers are the ones that can just go...
Well, like with Marc, who goes, I'm going to do 60 stripes. And
what we never get shown here, we're all sitting looking at this, which is great, and then you go to the shows and you sit there and you look at it, it's great. What we never see is not a circus, that would be the wrong word, but the kind of this huge amount of energy that's gone into these. You know, the designers stay out all night for a week.
The magic for weeks.
For weeks. Then,
you can get that off Twitter. I think you are starting to get that energy, and that's something that's nice about it.
That's what's been quite charming about Victoria Beckham on Twitter with this particular show, actually. Blessing, you know, seriously. And the humour with it, showing that she's working all night. I mean, that is typical, isn't it? But actually, to people who are reading her tweets, they probably think that's really abnormal, but you know, that is totally normal.
I don't think people understand that. I don't think that's widely perceived in how the designers work. And from my relationships with a few designers and seeing how hard...
But everyone involved in the show, I mean, I've been at shows where at the end of the show, as a PR, you would maybe go near the backstage and people are telling you what they think of it, or you go to the entrance where people are leaving just to say goodbye and gauge what people are thinking, and actually you're concentrating really hard on not fainting because you're all shattered. Everybody's shattered.
I mean, I remember working on one of my first couture shows, and I came back and it was only a few days to go, and And I went up to the studio and I was like, no, really, we've really just got to like get a wiggle on. And the boys would be so focused and so sort of like precise on what they were doing. And I remember going up and saying, listen, I don't know whether this is the Emperor's New Clothes or what is going on, but you couldn't see anything. But then if you stay and watch a fitting, you can almost see these dresses being breathed to life, and you can see something take part. And when you actually get to witness something unfolding right in front of you and see how these things are creating, I think the thing is, I think with journalism, I very much felt I worked in a couture house for a while because I didn't think it was for me to make a comment as a critic without knowing all the hours, sweat, blood and tears that goes into it. I think it's a hypocrite for me to sit in the front row and go, that's a nice dress, full stop, or go, that's a crap dress.
It's a month of work, really kind of hard.
6 months or so. These collections, they would have started on these collections, we're September now, I would have thought they would have started, so the last shows would have been February, March, they would have started doing their research books April, they would have started sampling May, they would have
for the fabrics much earlier as well.
They would have ordered the fabrics around April, May time, so then they'd be committed to silhouettes in June, so they'd do fittings, early fittings in July, then August everybody in Europe is shut, and then whoop, there you are. And of course you want to change and feel things as it goes along, but you have to make a lot of decisions quite a long way in advance, and to see how it all sort of unfolds and plays together.
What you're saying about being in the studio late at night, I've worked where the stylist comes in quite late. Some of them are very involved from the beginning, some of them are in the collection. Working with a lot of young London designers, the stylist might come in quite late. Or what you find is a lot of stylists have got other commitments, professional commitments, like big shows, and then if they're going to help a young London designer, they come in quite late to help them. And I see a lot of those magic moments happen in the middle of the night before a show. Like with that, where I've seen actually a stylist say, put it on back to front. And they put it on back to front, and the stylist has gone absolutely berserk, but the designer wasn't happy. And then you get everyone's emotional, and it's really can get quite fraught.
I want to come in on something that we've kind of talked about in this haphazard nature, where someone can take something out before it goes out, or turn a jacket round, or put something on back to front.
And just remember, the buyers, the running order. I've had shows where we actually have the model name and describing what they're wearing, just so that you've got the clear notes for the buyers, and also for the journalists. It's quite nice that you know what the fabrics are. Louis Vuitton do very extensive notes, but can you imagine the running order changing and preparing?
It's like a nervous breakdown.
I've been backstage at Paris shows where we've actually brought our printer with to the show venue.
You change it, but with the buyers, that's something that I wanted to mention. It was this idea that you can have a whole collection. Something Jonathan from JW Anderson said when we spoke to him is, you do this whole collection, you have sort of however many exits, and then it could be 2 looks from it that the buyers pick up on, that actually you think in your head, that wasn't my vision at all, or those weren't the ones that actually really summed everything up. They were just kind of 3 that I liked, but weren't the whole message. And it's interesting as much as it is what the looks that the designers choose to put on the runway.
But it's a bit like putting out an album. You have 12 songs on the album, and you think your favourite song is about your cat dying, and actually everybody goes for the song about you having your heart trashed in the middle, and it's different people empathise with different things.
But that's changed in the same way, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Now they put out the whole album.
At the same time, exactly.
And people pick and choose what they want. And one gets the best sales gets the video.
Should the buyer buy those pieces that they're feeling, or should the buyer buy what the customer wants, or should the buyer buy what they think a magazine like Grazia that's outputting every week bring out? Or should the buyer actually challenge the customer and educate them with a new idea like Rodarte?
But that's why Moda Operandi is so clever, because they make us the buyer, or the person who's buying it. You can buy straight off the runway, because there are quite a few show pieces that you think, gracious, who's going to buy that? And those sites do dare
and
you to
Net-a-Porter do that, don't they? Yeah. It's very clever, because you're putting the order in, so actually there's no wastage. It's like if the demand's there, they're going to order it.
I was just going to say it's interesting with the Rodarte one, because depending on what buyers pick up on, in 6 months' time that could be a completely different collection that we're seeing people wearing and engaging with.
Well, they quite often do a different permutation for sales as well. I've been to, I won't say who the designers are, but I've been to big Japanese designer showrooms in Paris as a buyer for Browns, where the pants from the show were far too expensive, ridiculous. That was back then, they were £300 retail. And we actually had to ask them to make a special basic pant for us to buy. Because, again, another rule with buying is, if you buy a top, you have to buy a bottom. I know the customer doesn't buy it like that, but it's kind of a rule of thumb that you should try and do
piece
that.
it together.
But there's a lot of challenges for the buyers.
I think especially with a collection like this, there will be challenges, but also there'll be the pieces where I think even these skirts that perhaps aren't the bit that you notice when you look at that look, because we all said how much we
I'm going nuts about that jacket.
So you can see that skirt
brilliant.
sort of selling everywhere. And I think it's strange how a designer's vision, maybe it's a positive thing, maybe it's a negative thing, can be so distilled and so shaped by a buyer. In particular, I think that's something with Rodarte they've always managed to escape, I think, in the past, but something that might be interesting to see whether that...
I mean, I think we're doing Rodarte a great service having this discussion and looking at these images and you know, hearing your opinions is wonderful, but you know, do you think that a buyer gives it this much attention, really? Do you think that a journalist gives it this much attention? They don't. They have to go through thousands and thousands of images from thousands and thousands of shows.
Yeah.
There might be shows that they missed. So, you know, again, with this modern media,
I mean, when I used to do the shows in a big way, it was like speed dating. You would do one onto the next, one onto the next, and at the end
there's
of
no
the day,
palette
you
cleanser. There's no
Yeah.
palette cleanser. You go from a hardcore Armani type show, then you're going to a kind of niche designer show in the Lower East Side.
I
you know,
mean, in New York,
you
I
can't be
remember when
objective. You cannot be objective.
You
Well,
said
no,
that with Calvin Klein, it's at the end and you kind of wish and it goes past.
Yeah, I mean, when you would do the schedule, you'd sort of like plan it in the morning, and you would know that you weren't going to see a knife and fork until probably the following breakfast, but you would know that you would be going from very classic and bourgeois to very avant-garde to this to that, and you just basically, you would have to just sort of go for it. But at the end of the week, when people would say, "Oh, what was the season for you?" or do a roundup of this, you would have absolutely no. Well, I never did.
No.
I never even know what.
Even the buyers have got cars waiting outside the appointments. Can you imagine what that's like for the designers when the buyers arrive and they're saying they're arriving and they're actually the welcome to the designer is, "I have to leave in by 20 past. I'm going to the airport."
Yeah. I think now that we're debating it and now we're looking at it and giving it time and pausing it, I mean, who are we to say? But I think it's, you get to appreciate it much more than you would at a show, because when a show finishes, you literally have heart palpitations that you've got to get to the next one, battle your way in, have the same air-kissing conversation about, "Oh, how are you? Did you have a nice day? I haven't seen you for a show." I mean,
I went to a Louis Vuitton show last year and I was asked to tweet for a newspaper. I wanted to take pictures for my own blog and I wanted to take pictures for people back and friends of the designer. And I'm not kidding you, I had a great seat because I'm friends of the designer, and I'd never tweeted before then, and I was doing a tweet and I had someone who works with me actually standing taking pictures, you know, whatever, and actually I could hardly see anything and I was on the second row. And concentrating on a tweet, I can't say I actually saw the show.
Well, that's what
and I was trying to look peep at the show notes. I mean, it was and I left my camera there because the whole thing was chaotic.
I mean, I think now with the modern media, the sort of like the actual person going to the show, they've got it quite tough because you've got to multitask and juggle so many sort of elements.
That's what's amusing about the criticism that you get by people saying, "Well, you can't analyse the show by the pictures, you've got to be at the show," because it's the people at the show who are taking those pictures and they're not watching it.
I was doing Instagrams for the couture, and I found it a real problem to try and work out, okay, well, I'm going to miss these three looks, so I'm going to photograph that one, and then... So
but you see people watching it just holding their iPad almost in front of their own face.
And you know what, there were some rules on one of the websites today about how you shouldn't hold your iPad up at a show because it blocks people's vision. But I remember going to the Alexander Wang show last season, and he always does it in an arena, in a kind of round stadium type venue. And at the end of the show, I mean, it's insane. It's just not something I'm used to seeing. Everyone's just holding that up, and it actually looked like a tiled arena.
Well, also nobody talks to I mean, that's the problem with, I mean, me sounding like a granny again, but that's the problem with all this Twitter and this, that and the other. It's not a problem, but nobody talks or discusses things or sort of gets the feedback from the person next to each other because they're too busy tweeting somebody 300 miles
No, but the equivalent
away.
of that is the person who responds to the tweet.
But
That's
you're too busy because you're just like, the next look, and I think almost
it is,
this
it's actually like being sucked down a plug hole.
It is, yeah.
We're using it to take time to reflect.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm talking about iPads. We have a young Spanish digital illustrator called Rain Dahl.
Who's doing these fabulous illustrations on...
she's drawing on her iPad live. I mean, like they used to do in the day.
Well, Gladys Parent-Palmer, the new Gladys Parent-Palmer, isn't it? This woman who always used to take the illustration for Sunday Times.
Who always used to insist on sitting at the end of the row so she could see the feet. She didn't care what row she was in.
She was always wanted to be front row.
So she's doing,
cute.
yeah, she's got
really
this in 30 seconds.
Really cute.
Really cute.
That's really adorable.
And is she doing it for SHOWstudio?
Yeah,
exclusively
wonderful.
for Sit.
There's one Taffy.
Oh, they're great.
I love that. I think that just captures the movement of that look so perfectly.
Where did you find her?
She had a fantastic Tumblr called Death and Milk, and we were looking at...
Is she in London?
No, she's from Sevilla in Spain.
Did you fly her in?
No, we flew us out, actually. It's the other way around. I discovered her on the internet, and we wanted to do to get her to curate our Tumblr, but we thought, okay, we'll make it more interesting. Every day we'll send her a different piece of clothing to wear, because she photographs herself. So we did a fashion shoot where we sent a stylist, so we got Ellie Cummings to get the styling together. My assistant Chloe took them down to Rodarte, and every day we would deliver a new piece of clothing. So she'd do her Tumblr.
So she's there now and she's capturing all these. This is wonderful, isn't it?
Jeannie Becker's got a great quote there from the Rodarte girls. It's just about imagining yourself as the best you can possibly be. And I think that's a very good attitude for America and for what we've seen at New York Fashion Week.
What is the best you can possibly be though? I mean, I think that when you're the best you can possibly be, the clothes are less important.
But I think that's true with the
but I think that's true with them.
We said that when we saw Carly, you know, and she is a fantastic model, but the dress wasn't wearing her anymore, and you could see how there was the interplay between her and the dress. It was inspiring her and giving her this attitude, but also she was kind of, Camilla, you said it with the couture, how it came to life when she wore it, and I think that's something the Rodarte sisters, they do so well, is giving these clothing, and it's an attitude, and it's an idea, and it's this idea of kind of fantasy, and whatever it can be for the individual shopper, it's this something special that comes from their show. Should we give it a round of applause?
Yeah, I think congratulations to them.
Well done.
Yeah.
Should we say something about 9/11?
Would you like to?
Not really. It's more that we mentioned it on passant, as it were. I think it's probably, as it is 9/11, the anniversary of 9/11, we should at least acknowledge that. What a dreadful event that was for everybody, in every sense of the word. But more to say, that's up to you.
I mean, I was in a very difficult position because I was quite young in my experience of working as a PR and organising shows, and I remember I think the 2 days after we were releasing the new issue of Arena on Plus, and we had Justin Timberlake on the cover in front of a burning American flag, so it was actually a PR's nightmare, but to someone who actually didn't think they knew what they were doing, so it was really weird and strange. And what was heartening was that the next day, when I had to ring up some of the more mainstream media who I didn't think would be sympathetic, they were completely understanding, and I think everyone behaved in a very heartening way. And just one other thing I wanted to say was that when you're working on shows and stuff, you're working all night long. I'm sure that a lot of your team are just trying to catch your breath the whole time. But I remember I was working all night with some of my colleagues in the office, and we had the radio on from Ground Zero, so we could hear it all, you know, in the background. It just felt like fashion was trivial, and why are we doing this? And then I think it was about midnight, we could hear cheering and clapping, and we thought, what the hell's going on? And it was Ground Zero, and it was all the onlookers and the public cheering because the next load of firefighters had arrived to start taking over from the ones who were exhausted, and it was just quite an emotional time. And then the next day, Alexandra Schulman called a meeting at Vogue House because obviously everyone was like, oh, you know, very despondent, no one knew how to behave. And we all had a meeting, and everyone was saying, you know, should we carry on with Fashion Week, and, you know, what should we do? And I think it was Susie Menkes who stood up and said, listen, you've just got to, the show's got to go on, we've got to do it, you know, we owe it to everybody, and you know, all they've won, you know, typical spirit.
And I know that Anna Wintour, she was Anna Wintour and the CFDA in New York, they were determined, they kept Fashion Week going, and all the designers, although they had big shows down, it felt, you know, wrong. They did very pared down, just salon presentations. It wasn't big runways.
It was a courtesy.
And everybody went to see the collections because everybody wanted the business to keep going. They weren't going to be beaten by the situation, and you can't be beaten by terrorism. And I think fashion united in a very strong and chic, I mean, as far as you can be chic in these situations, but they sort of were out there to support everybody. They turned around an issue of American Vogue within 2 weeks or something ridiculous to show the American flag, and there was great sort of, I think there was a very very impressive show of, you know, Americans believe in this American dream and they will not be beaten by this situation.
And it was inspiring to see that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really inspiring to see that. And I think now, I know today down at Ground Zero they shine the lights up where the two towers were. And all day it's sort of this unspoken thing that you are thinking of the entire time, and it is on your mind the whole time. But I think, you know, I think that the strength of the women that are being muses for this situation, the strength of the collections that have come out of New York, it shows their sort of determination not to falter in adverse situations.
A lot of these designers that have come through post 9/11 as well, it's almost like this new wave that have got this kind of modern grit about them too.
I mean, I don't think we can trivialise it, but I think they...
No. I think we should just say my feeling is it was a dreadful thing. Any taking of life is a dreadful thing. I don't care what the reason. It can never be justified. It can never be right in these circumstances, as far as I'm concerned. And I think any loss of life, I don't think the world's a better place for it. I think it's a worse place. I think it was an awful event from both sides, from every side.
Yeah.
So I think it was a dreadful event all round. So if we're remembering anything, I guess.
It should be that.
So you shouldn't.
What were you doing, Lou? 9/11? Were you?
It's a strange thing because it was that age where, and I guess I would be that generation that you call the generation where they can't remember what it was like before it. And I think that sounds, I'm not trying to make myself sound really young there, but it is that case for me where I almost can't remember what life was like before terrorism. And I think it's what Nick said, it's the kind of thing where we're that generation where we have that and it's always in our mind, but it's something where you just kind of, you move on from it and it's something that you kind of accept, but you never accept it in the way that you just said.
I think you want to be a better person for it as well, don't you? You want to be a good human being, and that's how kind of people try and justify life when something like that happens.
And I think it's just as you said, Nick, I think it's a tragic, but it's also a note that has to be ended on because it has to be acknowledged. And I think that's what Fashion in America did very well, to acknowledge that. And I think that's important, that it's not kind of swept under the carpet.
Yeah, and I think that my feeling where I felt, oh, fashion's trivia, I mean, when I was a kid, fashion was regarded as trivia. It wasn't a proper profession, but actually now it is a proper business and it should be taken seriously. So
we should close on that poignant note.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.